if you've ever had your kid and you're like, "Hey, what's 7 times 8?" And they've given you this blank look like, "Did she just ask me to recite the Gettysburg Address backwards?" And you're like, "No, 7 times 8. We just did this yesterday." Or after the summer, have all the math facts exited their heads. Or they do a spelling test on Friday and they write and they get 100 on the test. But the very next week, you're like, "Oh, we're going to use that spelling word," and they can't remember how to spell it. I know that you have probably been there too. I have been there so many times. And before we start like questioning all of our teaching choices, let's just take a deep breath together because here's the truth. Forgetting is not failure. This is actually a very normal, expected part of learning. And today we're going to be talking about why this happens, what the research says about it, and how you can help your kids remember what they learn, especially if you're trying to teach a bunch of kids at once, which we know you are. We know you're teaching multiple kids, and I've got this kid who's memorizing this, and this kid who's learning this, and this kid who's spelling these words. And how do I have time to help all of them remember if I've got all of these kids? So, we're going to talk about some family review ideas. Okay, so let's go back and look at some of the research. So back in the 1800s, his name was Hermann Ebbinghaus, and he charted something called the forgetting curve. And basically, what Ebbinghaus discovered is that within a day, people forget 70% of new information that they learn, unless it is reviewed. So you learn something with your kid one day, and they're going to forget 70% of it by the next day unless you actually review that information with them. So then in 2006, that was when they discovered that spacing out review, that spaced repetition actually helps us to remember way more over time. And so doing a few quick little reviews every single day or a few days apart or even a couple weeks apart is way better than trying to cram in information. All right. There's this retrieval practice, and that just means asking your brain to recall something. So there was another study in 2006 that showed simply trying to remember information strengthens the memory far more than reading it over again. So rereading something is not as effective as actually making the effort to recall the information. So that moment when your child forgets, that is not a sign that something's not working. It's actually just their brain saying, "Hey, it's time for another round of practice." So this is a thing where we can't expect them to spell the word once on a spelling test and then know how to use it, know how to spell it forever and ever, right? We need to practice spelling that word the right way again and again. Same thing with math facts. They may fly through a sheet of math facts and actually have it down, but they need to do it more times before it becomes internalized, before it's something that they actually remember. The more they do it in these little chunks as opposed to trying to cram it all in, the better it is. And so what we want to do is not despair over this. We want to revisit things. We want to review things in natural, meaningful ways. So where does this fit in with family style learning? I think this is perfect for morning time. And the beautiful thing is you can do this with a bunch of kids together. So your homeschool setup is already doing like some of this review work automatically. When older kids explain something to younger kids, that is that retrieval practice in action, right? They can retrieve how to do something and explain it to a younger kid. So that's a really good thing. Another thing that happens is when your younger kids hear your older kids, they hear their material again and again over the years and eventually get to it themselves. That is spaced repetition. How many times has a younger kid like come up and known something because they heard about it when their older sibling was doing it? I mean, this is absolutely such an efficient way for our kids to learn. When the whole family discusses something together, you're building context And that helps the brain file the information in a way that it can find it later. So the discussions you're having in this group learning is building the context for the things that you're remembering. And we all know that context is so important to memorizing something. What are we doing with this? Why are we learning it? How are we going to use it? So, family style learning actually reinforces a lot of the good things that help us to remember things, right? You're not just saving time by teaching your kids together, you're actually strengthening the learning. Now, let me give you some things you can do to really be intentional. A lot of those things just happen in the background of our family learning, but how can we be intentional about remembering things and doing some of that spaced repetition and reviewing with our kids as a family? Few things that you can do is you can play explain it like I'm 5. So if your older kid is learning something and you want them to be able to remember it, you can have them turn to a younger sibling and explain it like they are 5. This is almost like a narration. This is like super sneaky and tricky, but like you can get them to do it. And if they can explain it, that means they're on their way to getting it. They probably have it already, but having them tell it back is just one other instance of that spaced repetition. They can turn to a younger sibling and explain something to them. So they're retrieving, they're rephrasing, and it's building their memory. What's your grandma's name? Yeah. What's her phone number? So put the phone numbers in there, put the addresses in there. Nobody else has ever taken your kid somewhere and been completely and totally embarrassed because they didn't know your home address. Not just me. So put those kinds of things in there, but you could also put anything in there that you wanted to put in there. You could put formulas in there, you could put spelling words in there, you could put math facts in there. And there's actually a little preposition song and a list of prepositions. It's fun to learn to sing and do. You could put the list of prepositions in there. I really love singing when it comes to memorizing things. I had one kid who really loved singing and then a couple who tolerated the singing, but it was definitely a way that we learned things. Basically, the biggest thing to remember though is as much as we want to as human beings, it's easy to say, "Oh my goodness, we learned this thing. You did such a great job. You made such a good grade on the test. We're going to check this off and move on to the next thing." But that's not the way the brain works most of the time. Most of the time we need that spaced repetition. We need to do it over and over again. And we need to work it into what we're learning until you extend the spaces. You don't have to do it quite so often. And eventually it just becomes something that's in that long-term memory that's super easy to retrieve. But we've got to bridge that gap and get it from the short-term memory into the long-term memory. And it's the spaced repetition that does that. We work fun memory work into all of our morning time plans, so do come check those out at shop.pambarnhill.com. And hey, I go live in our community each week and talk about topics that homeschoolers really want to know about. We would love to have you join us. I'm going to put a link in the description box below so you can come connect with me and other homeschoolers who are teaching multiple kids together. We'll see you soon.